not a single line.
So no one's coming after you if something bad happens.
I'm in the clear.
We're wondering if we're going to go live to Facebook in a minute. All right, so we are here on Zoom and we're also live on Facebook. I want to welcome everybody. Thank you, everyone, all the attendees who are in attendance right now. I'm Jordan Fiorentini. I'm the winemaker for Epoch. I'm here with Bill Armstrong, vintner owner of Epoch. I've got Jeb Dunnuck, who is wine writer, wine critic, owner of JebDunnuck.com, and Michael Twelftree, who is owner, winemaker of Two Hands Wines and Twelftree Wines in the Barossa Valley of South Australia.
So he's in Australia right now. It's 8:30 in the morning your time, right?
Absolutely.
I can't believe you're not drinking already.
Look, anything to get up and do one of these with the best looking man in America.
Which one is that?
Yeah, it's clearly Jeb. Clearly Jeb.
Oh, I know who he's talking about. Michael, man, you have a reputation to uphold. I can't believe you didn't at least look out at one glass, man.
Coffee. What's in your coffee, man?
I think he was referring to the best looking man as himself.
That's better. That would have been.
All right. Just to give a little bit of overview, we're all connected in many different ways, and we're going to talk about those ways. But for what relates to today is through Grenache and our love of Grenache. So we're going to talk a lot about Grenache and just share some stories with you guys. Without further ado, I want to start this Zoom tasting / what do I call it, just meeting, making sure that everyone is drinking some wine if you're in the right time zone. And hopefully that wine
if you're not in the right time zone,
or even if you're
12-3, put something in your coffee mug anyway.
I'll open something in a minute.
Yeah.
And if it's Epoch, hopefully you've got Sensibility, our Grenache wine in your glass from whatever vintage. Maybe you have a Two Hands Grenache or a Twelftree Grenache, or you potentially could have a Grenache that Jeb has reviewed on his website over the many years. So we'd love to hear what you're drinking. You can chat us up. A lot of people are letting us know what's going on and what they're drinking right now.
Oh, nice.
Which is awesome.
Okay.
And
read.
yeah, I know. I'm sorry. And we have been working together closely. Well, not closely, but together over the last many weeks. And so that's why we're sitting together.
So no social distance shaming.
So
okay.
We were social distance for a very long time, and now we are in the same room. So we're in the inner circle of who we work with. So we just wanted to let that go. I don't look very good with a face mask on Zoom. So.
I take Jordan's temperature every time I see her just to make sure she's not.
Yes, no, we're being very careful. So anyway, I just want to talk about Grenache and why we love it. So I'm going to pass the mic to Bill.
All right, so I fell in love with Grenache because of my sommelier class that I learned from a phenomenal teacher by the name of DJ Carney. And when I started getting hooked on wine, being an American, all I'd ever tried is Chardonnay and Cabernet, basically, when you get right down to it. And most of that was cheap Chardonnay and cheap Cab. And but I got hooked on wine, and so I went and took this 2-year sommelier course. And DJ Carney was this wonderful woman from Canada that was my teacher. And of course, in typical sommelier classes, they run you through the world, all the old world. So you get Burgundy and Bordeaux, and you get Tuscans and Sangiovese, and then you go through all the New World wine. Anyway, I really learned to develop my palate, and in that process, I was introduced to the wines of Chateauneuf du Pape, and I was just blown away about how awesome the GSM blends were from Chateauneuf. And so, and it was surprising to me because this was like in 2002. And really up to that point, Jeb, I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, but I just hadn't heard a lot about Chateauneuf up to that point. And, oh, by the way, I need to tell everybody that Jeb was the first critic to ever review any wines from Epoch. And for all, any of you all who drink a lot of Epic wine, we have a wine called Block B. And Jeb named it because he was trying our wines and we got to a barrel and we didn't have a name for it. And he goes, "What's this called?" And I go, "Well, do you like it?" And he wouldn't tell me. And I go, "It came off of Block 13. And about 2 or 3 months later, when the review came out, he had obviously scribbled his notes and he rated that Block B, I think like a 97 points or something. But it's Block 13 and the 1 and the 3 transferred into Block B. So anyway, Jeb named Block B.
Those are the old days when all the notes are handwritten and I write like shit. So a faux pas on my side now is.
I was so nervous of that first critic to try my wines, and I was thinking I'm not even going to name this wine if he gives it a bad score.
I remember I drove down and I tasted that with you at your office in Denver, and you just got off the treadmill and we're sweating up a storm, and we're.
Anyway, we've been great friends ever since.
Yes.
I'm not friends with all critics, but I'm a friend with Jeb. So anyway, so I just fell in love thanks to DJ Carney with the Chateau Neuf wines. And I knew, being a geologist, when a few years later, when I decided I really wanted to get bigger into the wine business, I knew that the wines that I wanted to produce and share with my friends and my family were basically a GSM blend. And to tie it around to Australia, in those days, my wife and I were as broke as you could get. And the only wines, Michael, that I could afford were wines from Australia. So I would look at you and your dog. I was, so I would go to the wine store and I'd go to the wine store and I could barely afford anything over like $16. And so I was getting these like the wines from, from Torbreck and others that were on the shelf. And
this is what year was this? I don't want to call it bullshit, but bullshit.
It's total true.
Yeah,
my wife would log in here. She would tell you we were just.
She's on. Liz is on.
Yeah, say something there, wifey. Anyway,
she'll message us.
So anyway, so I fell in love with Grenache, and I've been a lover ever since. And so anyway, I just think it is I think it's a lot more interesting than Pinot Noir, but not quite as big as Tempranillo and Shiraz and Cab. And I think it's the best thing to have. It's the best thing in the world that pairs with chocolate. Ooh. Without a doubt. And
vintage port for me.
And if it's we don't talk about vintage port, and I've always found that if I'm going to woo women, which is only my wife, Grenache does it.
Ooh, I love that.
No comment from Jeff on
that.
or George for that matter. Anyway, that's my Grenache.
I just want to go over something really quick before we pass the mic to Michael. We are drinking a bunch of different Grenaches, and like I said, the hopes is that you're opening whatever you have or whatever you've been wanting to open. We have 2011 and 2015 Sensibility. These are two vintages that I love of our Grenache. We also have 2018 Sensibility that we bottled yesterday. No comment on that. Nothing called bottle shock exists.
And by the way, we're bottling right behind.
I have a story on this bottle shock. I used to taste. I always show up and taste with Bill, and Bill loved the wines, loved. Oh, you've got to taste it. And then it would get bottled, and he would literally claim bottle shock for probably like a year and a half later. And I'm like, you got to give it up. You just let it go.
I still do.
So then we have 2018 York Mountain Grenache, which was bottled an hour ago.
And then we have the project we're doing with Michael, which is called Gratitude, and we'll tell you more about that as we get further in. So
yes, and we'll talk about the differences in the Grenaches and the growing areas too. And I see some questions come on, so we'll try to address those as we get through this talk. So Michael, how did Grenache happen for you?
How did it really happen for me? I suppose taking Grenache as a varietal here in Australia is that really at the turn of last century, Grenache was planted widely across McLaren Vale, Barossa, even the Riverina in Australia. And the reason that it was planted was Australia 100 years ago only made fortified wines. And so what's really fascinating is that Grenache was used because it would always throw a really big crop and it would always ripen and it didn't need any water. And then a lot of it was planted in the 50s and the 60s for distillation. So I suppose kind of, I looked at it and went, wow, we've got all these amazing resources of 100-year-old vineyards. Like, I suppose what's fascinating is in the Barossa Valley, you have the oldest Mourvedre in the world, the oldest Cabernet vines in the world, the oldest Grenache, and the oldest Shiraz vines in the world. Yet we get to be called the New World, which I always think is a little bit funny. So I was coming back from a trip to Burgundy, and I really wanted to start kind of making some Pinot Noir. And when you look at Adelaide Hills and all the vineyards that are available to me, the vineyards have a diurnal range where I think Pinot really needs that soft, cooler ripening conditions. And if in the Adelaide Hills would have a weekend of like 35 to 40 degrees Celsius, it'd burn off that kind of pinosity. And so I started working with a lot of vineyards up in Blewett Springs, which is a sand dune that was pushed up millions of years ago into the hills high above McLaren Vale, and it's an elevated site. So it's a lot more Gigondas than Chateauneuf. So it's not kind of a flat, boring, it's much more elevated and...
Easy, calm down.
Oh, sorry, mate. I always talk too fast. Anyway, so I started sourcing all these vineyards, and I went to...
You never get a chance to talk, Jeff. I just know how Twelftree goes.
Hey, man, I love it. It's all good, buddy.
So I started going to growers and sourcing really old material, like 80 to 120-year-old vines, and then going and doing a lot of the farming myself, because I think the hardest thing, like Grenache, to cultivate Grenache and to grow Grenache and to get Grenache ripe, it is incredibly difficult to grow. And I think that's what a lot of people don't quite understand. Sadly, here in Australia, it's kind of seen as a B-class grape varietal. You know, Shiraz and Cabernet has always got the focus. Now Grenache is starting to get the focus. But I think we did a really bad job in the 70s and 80s making Grenache in Australia. They used to put it in a lot of old American oak. It used to oxidize. And when I got into wine, I'd go to cellar doors and they'd get to the Grenache and they'd say, would you like to taste the Grenache? And I'd always say, do I have to? Because the wines were really hollow, alcoholic, had this sweaty, they're just dreadful wines. They didn't prize purity of fruit. And I think with winemaking techniques and people working a little bit harder in the vineyard and prizing more of that, what I would say primary and more energetic and not macerating the hell out of it, using a bit of whole bunch, fermenting in a bit of concrete, not using any oak at all or a little bit of older oak. The wines now all of a sudden are what I would say is something I'm really proud of. And I think the wines are quite remarkable. But Grenache, like I get really sick and tired of sitting around with a whole lot of guys that make Pinot telling me how hard it is to make Pinot. And I'm like, well, ever tried making a Grenache? And I think if you're going to make 100% varietal Grenache, that is a real magic act. That's a very, 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 very hard thing to do. And, you know, interesting that, you know, Chateauneuf is predominantly not 100% Grenache. There's only, I think, 10 wines in all of Chateauneuf that are 100% Grenache. And every time I get the pleasure of tasting like Barbarac from Chapoutier or Reyes the other day, or all of those wines, I think the honesty that comes with Grenache is the thing that I like the most. And I think that's why it's something that I just draw so much pleasure from, because there's an honesty of the vineyard. You can't do a whole lot of winemaking artifact to it, and the result is the result. And you can't make a lot of it because here in Australia, all these old vine parcels are very, very small. So that's why I love Grenache so much.
Hey, Michael, what percentage, how much acreage is planted to Grenache there?
Oh, Jesus creepers, mate. I think it's, I know in like McLaren Vale, it's about 7%. In the Barossa, it sits under 10%. So it's not, a lot of Grenache has been removed, and a lot of Shiraz has gone in because you could always get a higher price for the Shiraz. Shiraz was easy to grow. Grenache, like the hard thing with Grenache is as a vine, it wants to show off every year. Like it always throws a big crop, and you've got to thin it down. And just after flowering, you've got to get like the tannin development on a bunch of Grenache starts like really early in the season. And if you don't have sunlight and airflow going to those bunches, you are never, ever going to get even ripening. And I think that's the hardest thing with Grenache is a lot of times you'll see bunches on a bush vine that are close to the ground, and you turn them over and one side's ripe and the other side's still green. Well, you've got to cut that bunch off. You've got to do a lot of sorting. The skins are very thin and there's a lot of plump. So you've always got to drain off a little bit of juice to get the skin to juice ratio correct. And it's something that you never really want to beat it up. To me, it's got to be handled incredibly gently at every stage. It doesn't want to be racked. It doesn't like a lot of oxygen. I bottle all of mine after 9 months because I just don't like that second aging phase. If you do leave it in oak, if I have those wines that have a high percentage of either new oak or have had a longer maceration in oak, I find that they get a little, how would I say, they lose that purity of fruit. And I think that's what I prize so much with Grenache.
Awesome.
Great.
Totally agree with you. That must have been why we made a wine then.
Yes. Yes.
All right, Jeb, this is a different perspective.
I'm pretty easy. You know, I've always loved Grenache, to be honest. You know, I traveled through France and I think sometimes you fall in love with a region as much as you do a variety. And so I traveled through the Rhone and I really fell in love with the concept of kind of a rural, rustic place, but yet these beautiful wines that offer incredible amounts of pleasure. And a number of people will compare Grenache to Pinot, and I love that comparison, actually. They're both thin-skinned, they're both hard to grow, but I always say Grenache delivers what Pinot promises. I don't want to, that's kind of a knock on Pinot, but the thing is that Grenache offers beautiful aromatics. It can have this incredible complexity and nuance, and it evolves relatively quickly too. So you get this spectrum of aromas and flavors over time, and yet it almost always delivers texture and richness on the palate. And I think, Bill, that's kind of what you alluded to as well. You know, Grenache, generally speaking, is almost always fun to drink. And so that's one thing that I love about it. You know, if you're ever tired and you need something to pick you up, you know, a Grenache is kind of the way to go. And so really, I started my whole career of writing about wine based off the Rhone Valley, based off a lot of these wines. And so that was largely based off Grenache. And so I agree, it's very difficult to do well. California is on, you know, it's very young and growing Grenache. And I think it made huge strides, and Jordan is doing an incredible job, but it is not an easy variety to do. It can lack color, it can lack density, it has a lot of alcohol, so you have to get good concentration to it. And that's what a lot of people struggle, I think, in California with Grenache. They try to make it Pinot, and you have this crazy alcohol, and to get this balance is very difficult. So it's not an easy variety to do, but if it comes to drinking and offering pleasure, you know, I can't recommend Grenache enough. So it's certainly one of my favorites.
Wow. You know, you guys just said, which I microwave. It's 8 a.m. after all.
His breakfast is ready or something. I don't know.
I just had these
toast came up.
throat, and for me, it's kind of like doing a blind tasting. Here are all these different wine people from different walks of life and different areas, different growing regions, sort of say the same thing about Grenache. It's almost like tasting blind, because we said the same thing. We didn't rehearse this before, but we're coming to the same point. So it must be true, right?
I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, I'll play along.
But Jebbers, I totally agree with you. I mean, to me, it's easy to have so many Grenaches are one-dimensional, and the people that make them, they don't really put the effort into what Michael said with the sorting and didn't get ripe correctly. And you try it, and just an average Grenache, sometimes you're just like, wow, it's a one-dimensional wine. But when you find it when it's done correctly, I mean, all my friends always ask me, like, Bill, of all your wines, which one do you like the most? And I have to say that the wine that, when I'm walking around my property by myself, I usually grab a Grenache.
Well, this goes back to what Michael said. Literally, to do Grenache on its own is very difficult. You know, in Chateauneuf, they blend, right? So you want a little color, you add Syrah. You want a little mid-palate, you add a little bit of Syrah. Then you want structure and tannin and spice, you add Mourvedre. So, you know, they have that flexibility to blend, and you can shift that blend many ways to achieve what you want. But literally, if you're going to make a 100% Grenache, that wine has to have everything. And so it's very difficult to do. It's not easy to make 100% Grenache that'd be a very complete, beautiful wine. But literally, when it's done beautifully, it can be some of the best wines in the world.
I totally agree.
So one of the things that we've sort of touched on, which with all the things we just said about Grenache, which is exactly what I had written down, it has so much purity to it and so much transparency that it really shows where it's grown. so well. And that's something that we all strive for as winemakers and wine drinkers, is to really understand, like, when you open that bottle and you taste it, you not only get the variety, but you get where it's grown. And I find that Grenache does that for me. And we have an example of that in front of us. Unfortunately, we couldn't just send this out beforehand, but hopefully it'll inspire people to either open 2 Grenaches from different growing areas side by side, or just think about that in the future when you open different wines. And we're going to talk about that in the next part. So we've gotten some questions about how the Rhone Grenache is different from West Paso, which is different from York Mountain, which is different from Barossa. So hopefully we can hit on all those topics. One question off Grenache was from the Hewitts, and I wonder if it's because they were asking about Hewitson Mourvedre for Michael. And they said, is that the oldest? Sorry,
1853.
It's the oldest wines in South
1853.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Old Garden Mourvedre is the oldest Mourvedre vines on the planet.
That's correct. Planted in 1853. It's a gorgeous little vineyard, and he's had that for over 20 years now. And it's one of my favorite wines made in Australia. Dean is just an absolute stand-up guy, and he's mastered that. And I think it's a real flag bearer for just how great that making 100% Mourvedre is really, really tough. But you and I had a bottle when you were down in 18, and that wine was just phenomenal. So yeah, I really like that wine.
Love that.
So Michael, how does a 150, 160-year-old vineyard, is it low production? What's the fruit taste like? You know,
I think the most interesting thing you've got to remember is that everything in Australia is on own roots. So, you know, nothing's on rootstock. So really, if you want to talk about kind of honest perception of a vine, you've actually got it on its mother root. And these vineyards, if they're well maintained, they're obviously very thick, very old, and they're very inconsistent. I struggle with a lot of old vineyards because, especially Shiraz vineyards, they show a big crop one year, or one vine's got a big crop, the next crop's got 3 bunches on it, the next one's got, and it's really, really hard with these older vineyards. And a lot of times they didn't plant the old vines in the best spots either. I think we're now going back and planting on much better land. And I think we're doing a much better job of putting vineyards in now, and with our trellis systems and row orientation and all the tricks that we have now. But there is something, when I've got a really old vineyard up at Blewett Springs that I make my favorite Grenache, Schuller Grenache, from every year. And it's like walking through an antique shop, and it's, you know, 88-year-old vines, and I go and visit it. I'll go visit it today. Like, it's every time I'm in McLaren Vale, I always go walk the vineyard, and I just love that. To me, there's something, you know, yeah, you know, what interests me a lot about vineyards like that is they're on their own roots, they're untrellised, they're unirrigated, and we want to talk about natural wine. Well, why don't we talk about a natural resource? And to me, you know, that's where that whole thing gets me really upset, because at the end of the day, what's the point of making some, you know, wine that's not, you know, well made or sound off of a 7-year-old Merlot vineyard? I just don't get it. Where to me, these great resources of old vineyards, there's something that's just quite magical about them. And if I see a French wine with Vieille Vin on the label or something, I get all excited. There's a romance to it, and I buy into that romance too.
right.
The point I wanted to
quote. I have a quote from someone I think that ties into the Grenache, the love affair, which is awesome, and the association with Pinot, which is Grenache is Pinot Noir's dirty little sister with the tattoos and rock and roll boyfriend. Perfect. Thank you to the Farleys who put that out there.
That's original.
That's awesome.
That is pretty original. I'll give you that.
And then we have a lot of questions, which I think we can go about the clonal selection. Someone asked about Garnacha and the clones of Grenache. There's a lot of different clones out there, not as many as Pinot and not as many as Cab. And it is about matching the clone to the area and the rootstock. But I think we should maybe we'll talk about site, and then we can kind of get into clones. But since we have all these wines in front of us, and a lot of people are asking how do the wines taste different? Like, how does Rhone Valley Grenache taste different than West Paso, taste different than Barossa Valley? And I feel like Jeb is the perfect person to answer that question, because he tastes those areas more often than the rest of us do.
Yeah, so I tell you one thing that is you should be careful of, trying to classify how Grenache tastes like from Paso, or how it tastes like from Barossa or McLaren Vale or Chateauneuf, is fraught with error. Really, you can't do it. I mean, Rayas tastes completely different from Pego, which tastes different from Mordoray, which tastes different from Epoch. And so there is so much input from the site and from the winemaker and all the decisions and the year that are in there. So now you can certainly make kind of high level generalizations. A lot has to do with soil, and I wish it'd be great if everybody had these wines in front of them because you could see, you know, the thing about Paso, which really makes it unique, is those limestone soils. And I think that is a thread. If we're going to talk about Paso wines, you can talk about wines because you see it in all of them. You think about these limestone soils, and you pair that with very high daytime temperatures and cool nights. And so you have these rich, powerful wines, and yet there's almost always this sensation of minerality in there. There's good acidity. Now, I'm not going to pretend that that's always good. A lot of people are going to say, oh, minerality, acidity, it's always good. It's not. You have to be careful to get a wine that you want to drink that has a balance of alcohol, acidity, and fruit and texture. And so that's what people in Paso have to work, is managing these richness levels, yet these acidities stay very low. And so trying to get something that is enjoyable to drink is the challenge there. And that in tannin extraction. And so you see that if everybody has a sensibility in front of them, I think you'll see that this beautiful elegance to the wine, it does have a sense of the kind of minerality, a good freshness to it. It's not heavy. So that's a beautiful representation, I think, of limestone soils. And so if you take that to the gratitude, you see that's from different soils. I think that's more sandy clay. Michael, what is the soils from the Grenache?
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. It's on, there's a creek that runs through the north of the Barossa through Grenache, and so it's on the edge of a creek bed, and it is real silty, sandy, alluvial plain that it sits on.
Right. So if you taste that wine, you really see a dramatic difference between the tannins in those two wines. So you have this more kind of edgy, yet still really fine Grenache from Jordan, and then your Grenache, Michael, is a softer, I think it's a richer fruit. It shows a little darker tones as well. And so you see these dramatic differences between them. Now, a lot of people are going to say, oh, Grenache shows its place more than others. I would push back on that a little bit. A lot of varieties show their place of origin. Syrah, Shiraz, Northern Rhone, Paso, Australia are very distinctly different as well. So a lot of these varieties will show their place of origin. Grenache is a very transparent grape, which means if you add stems, you see it. If you add oak, you see it. So you can't cover up errors or screw ups with just a lot of extraction and just hide it behind oak and whatnot. So it's a very unforgiving grape. And so it really shows when you make a great Grenache, you've got probably a really good terroir and you've probably got a really good winemaker. So.
Awesome. You just hit the holy grail. So we have so many awesome questions that are being asked, and we're going to have a Q&A at the end for those who want to hang around. So we'll address the ones that we don't get to address right now. There was a question about natural yeast.
Are we going to drink wine?
I hope everyone's drinking wine. Are you drinking?
I don't know what you guys are waiting for.
I'm drinking. I want to hear what
latest from my time zone, so I can justify it.
I want to hear what Jeb is thinking about these as he's drinking. So
yeah, so we have so many awesome questions. We have whole cluster fermentations, which actually the gratitude that I made in South Australia with Michael has some like 50% whole cluster. We used to do more whole cluster on the sensibility. I think we're going to get back to that. It's I don't think it changes the natural yeast and the way we do it so much, but it definitely leaves an imprint on the wine because you're adding stems, which are adding tannin. They're also adding a spice element. So it depends on the character of those stems. And it's a decision. And as Jeb said, that Grenache is so transparent. So if you add stems, you're going to notice it. You're going to notice the tannin, you're going to notice the spice, you're going to notice the increase in pH from that addition.
And for people who don't know, increase in pH means actually the acidity goes down.
Right.
Acidity goes down.
Right.
Yes. And is there an ideal pH for Grenache? I mean, Grenache is really weird because it has low pH normally, but low acid. So that's weird because usually when you have low pH, you have high acid. Mm-hmm. Those two they're counterbalanced. But for some reason, it has low pH and low acid. At least in West Paso, it does. I'm not sure. I think actually the Southern Rhone definitely has low acid. The pH might be a little bit higher, but it's still not as high as other varieties. Is that right, Jeb?
Yeah. No, it's the pH and TA track in Chateauneuf, generally speaking, relatively closely.
Okay. And then I feel like it was similar in South Australia to like what we have here, where it has lower pH, but it doesn't have tons of acid either. So those are considerations that you have to to consider. And then also just what makes it play on the palate differently.
Yeah, we've gone mostly away from oak.
Yeah,
so we're mostly concrete now, I think.
So yeah, we didn't talk about, sort of, Jeb mentioned it, and I think Michael did too, but you put oak on Grenache and you really feel that oak. And I love oak. Oak is a great winemaking tool. However, you have to know that not only are you adding oak flavor, but you're adding oak tannin. And so it's how it interacts with the wine that you're making. And it's about your goals as a winemaker and as a, what do you want to make? What do you want to show? And if you want to show the site and you don't want the tannin from the oak to interfere with the flavor from the oak on a particular wine, especially Grenache for us, we don't use a lot of new oak on it. We use mostly concrete and neutral oak.
I'd also say that the oak brings a lot of oxidation into play as well, which Grenache really isn't a fan of at all. And I think that that's one of those things where, yeah, it's a bit like putting lipstick on a pig. It just doesn't work. I think you really want those natural tannins and those soft tannins in the mouthfeel, and that's really where that lovely texture. And I think the point I was going to make when Jeb spoke before was, I think I'd use the word drinkability. I think Bill likes Grenache because it's got drinkability, and I think we all like it because I love it. I open a bottle of Grenache with friends, and 15 minutes later I go to grab the bottle and pour some more, and it's empty. Now that's the magic moment right there. That you're not sitting around.
I have a question. Do you use concrete?
I do. I have a flotilla of concrete. I've used it for fermenting in the past.
What's that word? That's not in the English.
Did you say flotilla?
American English dictionary. I don't know what that word is.
Anyway, I've been buying as I can afford more and more concrete, and I've kind of had, what would I say? I age my Grenaches in stainless barrels that I had made and old French oak puncheons, and then I blend the two components together. So I put it on the bench and I have a real fruity from the stainless, and I've done that in concrete before as well, mainly ferment in concrete, but then I like to age in two separate vessels. I love component winemaking, so I love making two wines exactly the same, but then aging them differently and then blending them back together. And that's just something that I've played with because I love looking at, to me, Grenache has to have that purity of fruit and has to have that tension. And if you eat the oak and you leave it in oak, you're going to get that oxidation. You are going to get slightly different tannin compounds, which are great, but as a standalone wine, I don't think it's that exciting. Once I layer it in with some fresher stainless steel matured Grenache that I've from the same vineyard, same everything, then I 70, 30, 65, 35, I play around the portions, and I might just bottle, 50, 60 dozen. But that's kind of, to me, this has been a bit of an R&D department for me. Like, to me, it's all these small little things. And to me, it's, I just absolutely love and adore it. Look, commercially, it's mostly commercial suicide dicking around trying to make 100% Grenaches. But at the end of the day, it's the first thing I want to drink when I get home.
Mm-hmm.
Totally. I love that. Totally. Yeah.
I like your comment about lipstick on a pig. One thing that I've always say about oak is it's like makeup on a woman, right? I mean, it's like if you just lather it with American oak, it's like going to the Moulin Rouge, and it's just like a painted lady, and you just want just a kiss of it, if at all, with Grenache, because it just does so well, so natural on its own.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
I would only add that there are many ways to skin a cat, if you will. There are beautiful Grenache that spend time in even some new oak. There are beautiful Grenache that are brought up only in concrete. There are beautiful Grenache that are destemmed and that are not destemmed. And so they have so much flexibility. And all that goes into the winemakers tasting and making the choice and deciding what they want to put into the bottle. So
I want to, make a distinction with concrete versus oak and oxidation and reduction. So reductive winemaking is winemaking without a lot of oxygen. And when Michael's talking about using oak on Grenache, some Grenache, not all Grenaches in the world, but Grenache can get oxidized quicker than, say, Syrah or Cabernet. And so putting in oak, you're allowing more oxidation during the aging process.
right.
And in concrete, more of a rustic winemaking approach where the wine doesn't get exposed to oxygen nearly as much during its aging process, almost negative. It almost has no oxygen exposure.
Well, there's also a huge, what is the size of the vessel? I mean, if you think about what the Rhone does, the Rhone is always very large vessels. And so I would agree that Grenache is very oxidative. It does not like a lot of oxygen. So you either have these large foudre, if you like a little bit of wood, a little bit of slow oxygen transfer, or these very large concrete tanks. You know, today you have a lot of new winemakers are experimenting with concrete, but these are small egg shapes and it can be very different. You get a very different effect from this type of winemaking compared to very large concrete. So concrete and oak, we use those terms very broadly, can mean very different things.
No, you're totally right about that.
Totally, definitely, yeah. The size format, it's about surface area contact. I mean, we could get all physical about it, and but there's a lot of things that go into it. But
the other
talk
thing
about reductive winemaking mostly, but sometimes with oxidation. There's been some great wines that have Grenaches that have been exposed to more oxygen and oak.
The other comment I'd make is Grenache is just so easy to over extract. And I think that's the other hard, where you've really got to be really careful with ferment management, and your pressing regime has to be buttoned down, because if you go too hard with anything, it is going to finish up in the wine. The wine's going to come really hard, and it's going to lose that lovely gracefulness that you'd normally have from Grenache. And I've made some howlers where I've just kind of let the ferment run a little bit too hot and then press it a little bit too hard. And then 6 months later, post-Malo, going to taste it. And I'm like, this is terrible.
It's definitely, you have to think about it a lot more. Think about, you're mindful of what you're doing.
There's other varietals you can kind of slam and kind of, mistreat and treat them badly. And 6 months later, they're smiling. And Grenache is not one of those varietals.
So I guess let's talk about Paso a little bit, and then we'll talk about Paso, York Mountain, and then Barossa. But really quick, so we have different vintages of Paso, West Paso Grenache in front of us from Epoch. And no one's asked this, but I want to talk about ageability of Grenache versus, say, other varieties, because we talked about oxidation. But if the wine's treated right for what it is, for if it can use oak, if it can't use oak, if it needs oxygen during winemaking or not, the wine should still age beautifully, just like we talk about Pinot can age, just like we talk about, Syrah can age, whatever the variety. We have a 2011 sensibility in front of us, which I would say definitely has more age on it, obviously, than the 15 and the 18, but it is very enjoyable and it does not seem oxidized. So if you're doing things right in the winery for the wine you're wanting to make, you should be able to age it for a long time. Jeb's
I wanted to point something out. So I reviewed this wine on release, and I said it should be drunk by, I think, 2019.
Oh,
so I obviously made a moronic call. I would like to apologize. I do think that the wine is mature. I think it shows it's drinking beautifully, but it certainly has plenty of life. So I wanted to point out my complete screw up.
You can see that we changed the font size, so you can't really see that 2011 versus 2015 in here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it also depends on the vintage, right? How well it's going to age. But
I generally agree with what Jeb was saying there. In general, I think Grenache is beautiful early.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's just got such fruit and such brightness that, I mean, to me, why would you want to cellar it and wait?
I just say you could buy a lot of it and then drink it over time, different bottles over time. But yeah, I think the 15 for me is kind of where it's at in terms of age. I love the 2015 sensibility.
Yeah, beautiful.
It is a more delicate vintage, but it's just in the right spot. Someone asked about, is West Paso more suited for Grenache growing than other areas? And that's a really good question. I think that the question is kind of more like, is it more forgiving to winemakers? Like, is it not as hard to make great Grenache from West Paso as other areas? And that's a really good question. I think it's a great area to grow Grenache in. I know we put tons of effort to growing Grenache here.
Grenache can take heat though, and you've got sunlight and heat. And so,
yeah, exactly.
We had a vintage down here in 2008 where we had 13 days in a row over 100 to 110 Fahrenheit. And it was Shiraz just fell over. It was dreadful vintage, but Grenache just hung on, and we made great Grenaches in 08. And the sun came and the heat came, and Grenache just sat there. It doesn't whimper like Shiraz. Like, you get a heat event with Shiraz, tendrils fall over, the leaves roll over, the whole vine looks shagged out. And Grenache just sits there going, bring it on, bad boy. I'll take whatever you got. And I think that's why Grenache is such a great in a warm climate, because you know, you look at Chateauneuf where it's got 180 days a year of the Mistral blowing, it's hot as balls in summer, and you know, they make these wines that have beautiful purity of fruit. And I think your region's the same in that Grenache loves heat, it just doesn't sulk. And that's why.
And I think the special thing about Paso is we have a crazy diurnal temperature swing. So while it can handle the heat so well, I mean, there's other things that happen to the Grenache, like it bleaches out and it has effects from the heat. But if you look at the vine and you look at the fruit, you're like, you're having not a problem with this heat wave. But the fact that the temperatures dip down so drastically at night, normally in West Paso, and it retains the acid that it has, is also very important for that, for the grape and the style of wines that are made here. We have this guy, I don't know, Creedon Pedro from Facebook, I think. He's asking, maybe because he used the word reckon, I'm thinking he's Australian. I'm thinking that Grenache is slightly more fickle than Pinot. What do you reckon?
Look, I think Grenache is more consistent vintage to vintage than Pinot. I think, you know, trying to make Pinot, I've made one once and it was dreadful. So, you know, unless I can go to somewhere like southern Tasmania, I'm working on sourcing some fruit from a really special vineyard down there at the moment, but that's just a ton or two to play around with. I suppose I looked at it and I went, okay, South Australia, what do we do really well and what do we have great resources from? And that's why I decided to follow Grenache as a pursuit. And, you know, Pinot is something where the other thing I mostly like to note is that Grenache is really affordable. You know, to me, you can buy great Grenache, and if you really want to start playing with great Pinot Noir, you really, you know, you're talking $200+ a bottle. I was looking at the latest reviews the other day for the latest vintage from Burgundy. I was looking at the retail prices. I'm like, oh man, you know, where you can go anywhere and buy a great bottle of Grenache for $30-40. So that's another thing that I'd like to also point out as well. But
Michael, I would talk more about that Pinot concept, because I think good Pinot costs about $800 a bottle to get a good one, because you got to drink through 4 shitty bottles to get to one good one.
Yeah, that's most probably a fair point too. You know, I think if
it's not true, it's not true.
Listen, I know it's like.
Oh.
You may have to know what you're doing a little bit more to find value price Burgundy. Okay, let's say this, but there are beautiful value price Burgundies out there, and if you like Pinot, there are beautiful. You know, you can easily. Grenache does, I think, at the lower end. One of the beauties of it, from a Côte d'Aron, you know, $12, you get a hell of a wine for the price, and so it delivers this incredible amount of pleasure without a huge amount of investment. And so you can from a good vintage, you can pick a Côte d'Aron, and you're probably going to enjoy that wine, or you'll find something to like about that wine. You can't really say the same about Pinot Noir. Maybe it's a little bit more further north, a little bit more difficult. But you know, hey, if you know what you're doing, I'm going to say you can find good values out there in many regions. So.
You gotta send your list of key Pinot Noirs.
I got you back, buddy.
So on that note, I think we'll move to a different growing area. So we talked about West Paso. We didn't really talk about the limestone, but that's obviously what we love about the area so much, and it's extremely important as well to the wines that we're making. I wanted to talk about the York Mountain Grenache. None of you have this except for Jeb. Sorry, but you will soon.
Yes.
This is our vintage of Grenache grown on York Mountain. It's a separate AVA than Paso Robles, and
so it's where the tasting room is, where our winery tasting room is. It's right above, right above the tasting room.
And,
much closer to the ocean.
Yes.
To the
yeah.
ocean.
Probably like 5 miles from the ocean.
So,
yes, I mean, as the crow flies,
Yeah.
probably 5 miles. And actually, I can share a screenshot with you all. And I can't right now, but hopefully I will be able to later. Where you can, if you set, my husband just bought a new drone. So if you send the drone up, you can see the ocean. I mean, you just have to look over the next mountainside. So we're super close to the ocean. It's a much cooler area. And instead of limestone and shale, we have sandstone soils. And the growing area is just, the length of time of the growing season is just very different than it is in West Paso. It's much longer.
But this is like a rock hard sandstone. So when you come out to our tasting room, you can see all the building stones that are in the tasting room, that are in the walls around the tasting room. That's actually from the sandstone on location here.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's like, geologically speaking, it's a very hardly cemented sand. It's not like a dune or any kind of like loose sand. It is rock hard with just fractures running through it. We get a lot of rain here. We get like 50 inches of rain up at York Mountain, but we can't even drill a well here to get water out of it. So, because it's once the rain falls, it hits this hard sandstone and it just like goes through the fractures and just goes downhill, and we never see it again.
So you see more of a maritime influence there, like
yeah, a lot more fog. It's interesting from a strictly growing degree day standpoint. It's kind of similar to our Paderewski vineyard, yes. But our daytime highs are about 20 degrees cooler, and our nighttime lows are about 15 degrees warmer.
Yeah.
So it's it's interesting. If you just went straight GDD, you would say, they're very similar, but actually the growing concept is a lot different. So it's going to throw a different flavor and a different profile. So Jeb, you've tried it. I mean, you can probably talk about the difference you see between the York Mountain Grenache and the Paderewski.
So one, just at a high level, most people, the one stereotype of California is that it's all hot and New World, blah, blah, blah. The reality is most of California where they grow grapes is very cool climate. And so the further west that you go, the closer you get to the Pacific Ocean and the cooler climate you're going to get. And so if you think about Paso Robles, almost all of the great wines made from Paso Robles are coming from west side Paso. And so as you're moving further west, and York Mountain is even further west. And so you see this type of delta in the temperatures. And as you get closer to the ocean, you normally don't get that same diurnal shift. So you get a warmer nighttime. So that really changes how the wine presents itself aromatically and also in the tannins. And so you can see that. Now, are these new vines? Did you rip this vineyard and plant it?
Yes, it was. Parts of it were planted initially, in the late 1800s. We replanted it. We wanted to plant it in 2014. This is an interesting story, but it was the drought, and we don't have water for irrigation here, so we have to rely on winter rainfall. So we had green pots, so green growing vines like you buy at your Home Depot, going to be delivered in 2014. And we all had this conversation, and we said, can we ask the nursery to have these green pots go dormant through the winter of 2014 into 15, and we'll just hedge our bets, we'll hope for rain, and we'll plant them in 15. So they said yes. We did that. We didn't have a lot of rain in the 14-15 winter. However, we had to plant because the vines were ready. So we planted them, and then I don't know how this happened. I think it's because of Bill, the luck of Bill. I don't know. It rained in July. We got over 3 inches of rain, like a week after we planted these vines.
Yeah, it was all me.
It was crazy. So we just got really lucky. And then 16 had decent rainfall. We all know what happened in 17. There was so much rainfall. But there's a lot of rainfall in California. You can be assured that York Mountain is a deluge. Like, it was insane. We had lots of things happening on the mountain, but we were very grateful for the rain. So from 15.
Talking about that flood event that it flooded out our barrel room.
We had mud and water in the barrel room, which I'm pointing to because it's in that direction. But it rains so much in the winter out here. And then it's just about being able to let the baby vines kind of eke along until they establish root systems where they can, last through a hot summer day. Now, our hot summer day is about 10 to 20 degrees cooler than Paso. So.
Right. And we're talking, so this wine that I have the barrel sample of was made from what age of vine?
So planted in 15 and in 18. So is that fourth leaf?
First crop?
Fourth leaf. It's our first vintage.
First vintage, yeah.
Yeah.
So all, we hit a little bit on old vines later, and I wanted to give some context. Old vines are great because their vines go very deep, and so they're less susceptible to heat events. They're more stable, and sometimes they can have virus, so they naturally produce low yields. And so there are some benefits to old vines. Generally speaking, the benefits are better in old vines than difficult vintages. So we like to say, oh, these are very ancient vines, and there is a romantic side to this, and I love it and I get it. But I want to at least be clear, you can still make great wine from young vines. So now that can be controversial. There are a lot of people in the room that'll tell me I'm full of shit, but nevertheless, you just keep an open mind, I would say.
Totally. So I'm going to share a photo of, can you guys all see that? The York,
That's pretty.
that's the drone, the new drone in our household that just this morning.
That's from today.
That's from this morning.
Manu took that this morning.
So yeah, so if anyone you know, my husband, he loves his gadgets, and he just got a new drone. And if any of you have a vineyard, he will come and shoot it. He loves to do that.
So that's just right. That's right above your house, right above, right above our tasting room.
So there's just probably the first hillside that you see. That's the only reason why you don't have a view of the ocean from the top of the vineyard, which is really high, but it is just right there. So we're looking out. You can see Morro Bay Rock out in the distance.
Oh, that's Morro Bay. Okay, cool.
Just an unfathomably beautiful place.
Where is the vineyard in relationship to this photo?
Right below us, right,
Yeah,
right by the road there. You can see.
Just on the, sort of like the southeast side of the road.
Yep, just on this side of the road.
Yep. So I will also share another photo of that vineyard right now. But it's just a really cool spot and really fun. Like kind of Jeb saying, it's not that I think you should feel like you should be able to pick out which wine is from Barossa and which wine is from West Paso, but just that there is this difference, or there's something exciting about the wine, and then it intrigues you to go and look into why that might be different, right, Jeb? Is that a good?
Hey man, all you gotta do is show me the label, and I'll be able to pick them out perfectly.
We have it every time we see each other.
Jeb and I have raging debates on wine, because he goes, I don't give a shit where it comes from. How does it taste?
Yes.
No, I agree. No, all I'm trying to say is it's very, you can speak very eloquently about terroir and all this, but as soon as you literally just taste the wine and you taste blind, things can be not quite as clear as you would like or think that they should be. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that there's not differences in these wines. And so I certainly think you see, if we were, which everyone was able to taste the 2018 York Mountain and the 2018 Paderewski, because you do see a difference in those wines. And I think it comes with the difference in the growing season, the length, the ripening cycle. I think the tannins are actually a little bit more polished, a little bit softer in the York Mountain, where the Paderewski is a little bit bigger wine. I feel a little bit more minerality, a little bit more edge in that wine. And I think that is site specific. That's what the idea of terroir. Now, it is what it is, so I like differences.
Jordan, can I just ask you one question, please?
Yes.
How do you make your picking decision on when to pick your Grenache?
That's a really good question. So there's so many factors going into it. And since I've been here for 10 plus years, lots of different vintages, cool vintages, hot vintages, medium vintages. I look at the way the fruit tastes, number one. So Michael and I have a lot in common because I got to go to the Barossa in 2018, and that's where the wine will taste next. So definitely taste first. There's not like running the grapes to the lab to ask them to run the numbers to make the decision, because there's not enough time for that during harvest. The second thing is just looking at the weather and what's coming down the pipe. If we're in a heat wave, I'm not one of those winemakers who thinks that you should or should not pick during a heat wave. You pick when the fruit tastes right. And a lot of people believe maybe you should wait till the heat wave's over, but I've learned the hard way that the heat wave always lasts 1 to 2 days longer than the weatherman says. I should be a weatherman. I can tell you that, and I'd be all right, the weatherman.
Jordan the weatherman.
So that's really what it is. And then I'll take the sample. I'll probably have to already made the vineyard call, because there's so many moving parts during harvest, and I sort of make the call. I can't tell you how many times I've texted my vineyard manager and then the manager of our labor contracting company, because I might have to switch vineyards or switch sites on the vineyard, at like 10 p.m. that night. And they're very reassuring, and they're so nice. They always vineyard managers always want to pick, but I love that about Kyle, because he's our vineyard manager. He brings me down. Because if the fruit is great, I don't really think one day is going to make that much of a difference. Honestly, I don't, unless it's like 115 degrees, which has only happened one time. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And this is the understanding of that block. I can't reiterate enough how important it is to know where you're growing the wine, to have the history of several years, many years before that, and then also just looking at what's happening in the vineyard. So I just shared a picture of the York overhead, just really quick. I'm going to stop the screen share. But just, you can see this
That-
is the
that
entire
is,
York Mountain Vineyard. So you saw the ocean view, you saw more of a close up, and now.
So where we're sitting
all
is on the
different sites.
upper part of that picture.
Yes, we're here.
Right.
I'm glad Bill's here. I'm very directionally challenged.
And just so everybody knows, the picture makes everything look flat. This is far from flat.
That other picture.
Yeah, super, lots of hillsides, really steep hillsides, actually. Steeper at
Yeah, it's
Paderewski
really
than
steep.
at
It's
York.
really steep.
Well, actually, I came to see that. It's steep everywhere. Yeah,
Show that on the-
where there we go. So let me
even
see.
there, you can't tell the elevation because it's got.
Yes.
I mean, this is a workout walking this vineyard.
Yeah, if we were talking, I could definitely show you some really steep hillsides at Paderewski, but lots of undulating hills, tons of different exposures. So you've got north, south, east, and west at York.
Mhm.
And that is a huge factor in the wine too, not just the site, is the exposure. Whether the rows are facing east, facing west, that's just a really, really important factor in winemaking.
We're banging on an hour.
Okay, so I want to talk about the Barossa Grenache.
Let's talk about our joint project, Michael.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Well, I'll give you a little bit of history, how this came to being, in that I came to visit you guys, and I've been a couple of times now, and Jordan and I got chatting, and I said, hey, why don't you come down, ride side saddle with me for harvest? And I offer that to a lot of people. I travel all around the world, and I meet a lot of people, and a lot of them say, yeah, and they never do it. But to Jordan's credit, she got her ass on an airplane, and she kind of came down here, and she kind of got off the plane. I picked her up from the airport. The poor thing, she was like, that's a long way. I'm like, no shit, Sherlock, it's a long way. Anyway, she was down with us through about the 2/3 through harvest, and basically spent every day with me and every vineyard. I pretty much spend my entire time at vintage, walking rows, dealing with all of the growers that I deal with and all my own vineyards. That's my happy place. It's where I really want to be. And it was one morning, and I picked Jordan up, and we went out to my favorite Grenache vineyard in the Barossa. It's owned by Dave Materney, and it's about 60-year-old vines. It's trellis, but it's unirrigated. It's on own roots, and I make my best Grenache every year from this parcel. And for many years.
I have a map I just put up. Can't see it.
There we go. Okay. So it's where number 2 and 3 are, heading out towards Greenock. The vineyard had gone to Peter Lehman's for 35 years, and I'd been sneaking a ton or 2 ton. David's one of my favorite growers in the Barossa, and we've dealt together for a very, very long time. And we don't have great clones of Grenache in the Barossa. The Grenache in McLaren Vale is a lot more talented than the Grenache in the Barossa. The Barossa has this kind of redder fruit, pinkier, thinner skin varietal that was made for fortified. David's vineyard is planted with actually the black clone, and I only know of 3 vineyards in all of the Barossa that have this darker clone of Grenache. And so he had a falling out with Lehman's. He then offered me the entire vineyard, and I've taken it every year ever since. But this one morning we stepped out there, and it was Jordan got out of the car, and we rolled through, and I just taste the grapes, and if I like the flavor, then we decide to pick. And her face just lit up like it was Christmas morning. She was that excited, and she's like, I just love this vineyard. I just love this Grenache. And I decided to pick it a day later, and we were having coffee later that morning, and I just turned to Jordan. I said, well, why don't you take a ton and play around with it and see what happens? And that's really what I wanted to see, was a different winemaker's perspective on the same quality of grapes. And she went about making it quite differently to the way that I would have made the wine. But what was fascinating was 6 months later, post-Malo, we'd sent the wine back over to Paso, to Epoch, and I'd kept a barrel back. And I went to put my blend together for my very best Grenache called a Ropey, and that barrel actually made the blend of a Ropey 418. So to me, that was something that I learned a lot, and I learned a lot from Jordan being in the winery, and it's just fun to be around. And so therefore I thought, I've been quite successful, Bill's been quite successful, so here's an opportunity for us to actually do something together and actually give something back. And that's something that I really resonates with me, especially after all the bushfires in Australia and currently what's going on in the world. So the idea was there was going to be no commercial gain here. We'd make the wine, I'd send it over, you guys would bottle it up, and would have some fun with it. And as soon as I can get on a plane back to the United States, I will be in Paso to share a bottle with you guys. So yeah, that's pretty much the story and how it came to be.
That's
Jordan, is
great.
that how
You can't leave your country until the end of the year, right? My daughter's over there in Sydney. Aren't your airports closed down until the end of the year?
Look, mate, I normally go to my Qantas website and I have like 30 flights in there, and I've always kind of like flying somewhere, and to go in there and see one trip to go skiing in Japan next February, it's kind of really weird because
Wow.
I've been in the States 3-4 times a year, and to not even be allowed to go from my hometown of Adelaide and drive to Melbourne or drive to Perth or drive anywhere within Australia. So I'm going to see you sometime soon.
Well, you guys have been really lucky over in Australia, or maybe not lucky. But, you've only had like half a dozen deaths, right? We've had like 100,000 over here in the United States.
Well, my hometown here of Adelaide, the state, we've had 4 deaths, 420 cases, and we've had 2 active cases in 6 weeks. So
Yeah.
we're very, very blessed, and we're just seeing what's happening with you guys at the moment, and it's a bloodbath over there. And, you know, it's a phenomenal country. It's been great to me, and a lot of friends are really severely affected at the moment. So, you know, who could have predicted this, you know, at the end of the day.
This is the black swan event like we've never seen. And then, I mean, I don't think any of us in our country expected this to happen. I know I didn't. I thought that we had gotten so far with our technology that, you know, something like this couldn't happen. And here it is. I'm hoping it's blown over and kind of the worst is behind us at this point. So let's hope. Mm-hmm. But I love this joint project. So we made the wine. It's called Gratitude, and we call it Gratitude because we're so grateful for the first responders and the people that are working in the healthcare. Can you imagine going to the hospital every day and having to like get into a hazmat suit and take care of people? I mean, every day. And we're all sitting in our house and watching Netflix and you know, talking to you guys on the phone, and they're sitting there going to the hospital. So we're going to predominantly donate all the proceeds for this for sure, and then we're going to donate a bunch of it to the hospitals and the medical facilities. So
yeah, so we're actually, this is kind of fun because we're launching the wine for sale on Monday, June 1st, and we're going to be donating a bunch of the wine locally to the first responders. However, you in other counties and other states can get on and purchase it for $40 a bottle and gift it to whomever you like. And we haven't decided on the charity where all the proceeds will go to, but it will go to a wonderful charity. We might do a mix of the current pandemic and supporting that and the Australian wildfires because it's kind of a international outreach. Yeah. So we're really grateful to have this wine. We love the wine. We love it in the lineup. It makes so much sense. And it's so awesome to have Jeb and Michael and Bill on here today. Like, it's so great.
So Jeb, give us a 10-second differential between this Barossa fruit and the Epoch fruit from West Paso.
Yeah, so, you know, I actually love the Gratitude. To me, it actually has beautiful aromatics. I mean, it's very complex. I mean, sometimes you can get a little bit of eucalyptus or whatever, but there's like thyme and this herb de Provence and this but certainly it's a darker fruit to me than what is achieved in the Paso Robles Grenache that you guys release. In fact, and then on the palate, it's actually softer. So the tannins are much more round. The mid palate is pretty fleshy. And so it's just this beautifully soft, very drinkable, nicely balanced Grenache. And so I think it's beautifully done. And it's very different. I think you get more minerality, a little bit more edge, a little bit more focus with the Grenache from Paso. It's a little bit more feminine, maybe because it's more red fruit. It's not quite as rich, but it's very different anyway. So that's the beauty of wine, is that diversity. So anyway, I like
diversity.
Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere smackdown. I love it.
I know.
Okay, someone have a great.
If they taste the same, what the hell's the point? So I think it's
great point, Jeff.
We're not making Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
The best part about this project is that I get to riposte and I get to come and stomp all over all of Bill and Jordan's vineyard and pick my little patch one day and bring it to their winery and then do the reverse. So
absolutely, we'll definitely do that.
So I have a really quick, it was just a winemaking question because it affected me a lot. So when Michael said to me, we're gonna make the wine here and we'll age it for a couple months and then I'm gonna ship it to you. I was like, how the hell are you gonna ship it to me? How is this gonna work? You know, if anyone knows me, I am so careful with every step of the winemaking process. So Michael, I was really impressed with how the wine arrived. You know, in southern hemisphere, so we're in different months of the year, and I think it arrived at the end of May in 2018. So
we kind of cleaned it up straight away, got it to you, and I think it left us and was with you in 4 days.
Yeah.
So
no way. Is that right?
I didn't understand. I thought it was going on the boat.
No,
I did not get any of it.
No.
It went on an airplane.
That's a fast boat.
I know. I thought it was going on a boat. I was so confused. It was just, you know, the time difference, not sure what's going on. And then so it came on a United flight. I sent, if there's any winemakers from Paso or the Central Coast or California for that matter, really great friend who owns PCT, Pacific Coast Transportation. All of his trucks are refrigerated. He went down to the LAX airport, picked up the wine, you know, and when you fly overseas at super high altitude, it's so cold in the luggage department and the whatever, all the stuff they're shipping. So picked it up from LAX, wherever the trucks can go, put in a refrigerated truck, drove it to us. I was floored. I couldn't believe how wonderfully it traveled.
Yeah.
So kudos to you guys. I had no idea.
Very, very fortunate because my American importer, the Trelato family, helped out by giving us all their import approvals to be able to get it. So it was a really seamless exercise, but it could have been a disaster. You know, it could be sitting somewhere getting hot, you know. So the main thing was to, you know, protect it as best as possible, get it to you, get it into your cold cellars, and now get it into bottle and get it into people's mouths.
Yeah.
We actually bottled it about a year ago because we wanted to bottle it super fresh. But we just didn't know what to do with it. We knew we wanted to, I don't mind getting wines into bottle when they're young and fresh. It's about when you drink them, right? So Michael and I emailed about it, we bottled it, and we just labeled it today.
Good.
So it's got great bottle age, so you can pop the cork when you get it. But I think it's a tribute to, like, it's all about connections, right? We've got winemaking in Australia, the way it's shipped, the importer in the US, like all the people being on the same page makes it an easy journey for the wine. But for me, I had to go through the process to realize. You can see my email string. It was crazy. It was insane, but it can work and it's fun.
And I'll tell you, one of the beauties of a wine like this is I always like to eliminate variables. And so if you think we're going to just keep the winemaker the same, keep the philosophy the same, but just change the terroir, and you see the difference. So that's the beauty of a wine like this, is that, Jordan, you with the same mindset made a wine from Paso, the same mindset made a wine from Barossa, and here are the differences. So it's fabulous, I think, to try and eliminate those variables and trying to isolate. So just from an intellectual standpoint, that's the beauty of a wine like this. So
cool. I love that. Yeah, applying that philosophy. I think I talked to Michael's. He's got a winemaker too in Australia, and Ben, and we were chatting about philosophies, and we were very different. You know, I was like, we do it this way. He's like, no, we do it this way. And I'm like, oh wow, why do you do it that way? You know, so we get, I don't want to say stuck, but we have our facts, our what we, you know.
I think with winemaking that there's no finishing line. And it's just a whole lot of variables, and you trial things, and some things work and some things don't, but you're always trialing and stretching and pushing. And, you know, it's not something where you wake up one day and you go, oh, my wine's perfect, everything's great. It's like, wow, you know, every vintage is the variabilities. And I think that's something the consumer never really understands, is from a vineyard and winemaking point of view, what we live with leading up to harvest and then what we live with post-harvest. Consumers kind of see the end product and then get Jeb's review and they go out and they buy it and they drink it, but they don't understand the pressure that you're put under through growing a crop, you know, through pruning the vines, through the growing season, spraying, thinning, leaf plucking, wire lifting, irrigation. There's a myriad of a million things you need to do just to get to the point where you pick the grapes. And then having...
Yeah, Mike, we contribute to that too, because you'd go through all these tributes and trials, and then we write a note that it says it's 89% blah blah, and the consumer thinks, oh, everything is the same. It's just the blend. They miss these thousands of decisions that winemakers like you have to deal with every single year. So every year is very different, and you see that in the wine. And so, you know. And people quote points, and I really, at the end of the day, you know, it's what you think of the wine and what it tastes like to you. So you guys deliver incredible amounts of pleasure around the world doing what you do. So thank you very much for that. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
So someone asked about Jeb's review of the Barossa Grenache, and I had him review it when we tasted it in San Ynez last year, and I'm trying to pull it up. I know the number, I just don't know his words. And I feel
that's the
words. Sorry, Jeb.
I'll say this. So the reality is that the goal of a critic is to help people find wines that they like. Once that wine is in the glass in front of you, anything I can say or Jordan can say or Michael can say, to be honest, is really irrelevant. We can help you maybe understand why a wine tastes the way it does. But all that really matters is what you think of that wine. And do you like it? Would you pour another glass and would you buy a bottle? That is the sole purpose of a bottle of wine, is to give you pleasure, and you buy it for that. So don't ever take all these critic reviews and scores too seriously. Our job is to taste the wines and help you find a wine you like, and don't ever lose sight of that.
I love that, Jeb. Thank you.
I love that, Jeb.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, the other comment, Jeb, that I'd make there is that reviewing a wine is so different than opening and decanting and looking at a whole bottle of the wine. I think that's most probably the biggest difference, is that I quite often, I'd read that and go, great, I'd buy a bottle, but actually spending time with the wine and drinking it over a couple of hours and watching it change with some aeration and the textures and the flavors. So to me, that's exactly what the reviewer's there to do, is to kind of spark your interest. But there's nothing more than, your own taste buds are your own taste buds. And at the end of the day, I might say peach, melon, pear, and Jordan might say apple, pear, cinnamon, spice. We might have different descriptors, but at the end of the day, there's nothing more than spending time with wine. I think that's what upsets me the most when I have people at Cellar Door and they're like, oh, that one only got a 95. And I'm like, well, what did you do? Oh, did you drink a whole bottle of it? No, it's a very different experience sitting down, cooking a meal, opening a bottle of wine and drinking a wine over a period of an evening. Then, I do tasting notes every day of the week for all of my wines, and I'm tasting 100 barrels a day. That's a very different format than actually, and you can never, that's the most important thing, is to pull out a decanter, open the wine, decant the wine, and drink it over a couple of hours. And don't make these reactions to your first flavors, because they do change. And, I had a Vin Romane Premier Cru last night, and I had so much pleasure from it. But did I think about the wine too much? Because when I'm drinking and with a meal, I'm not considering a whole lot of, I'm not analyzing it too much. And I think that's the thing when you're doing a tasting note, you're analyzing the wine a lot. Sometimes just sit back and drink the wine. That's where the pleasure comes from.
Amen to that.
Amen to that. Well said.
Thank you, guys. So I can answer some questions after. I don't know about our panelists, like how long they can stay, but I live across the street, so I can stay and answer some questions everyone has. But I really want to, whoa. I think that was the airplane, but it felt like an earthquake.
That might have been an earthquake.
It might have
been a slightly. Anyway,
yeah,
that's
I can't
crazy.
tell.
Anyway.
SpaceX, Jeb, what just happened? If I don't know, aerospace engineer. Right?
Saturday. Watch Saturday. Everyone should watch Saturday.
Okay.
The only wine critic that's also a rocket scientist.
Yeah, you can
I
go
love that about you.
It's not rocket science.
I did satellites.
Oh.
Not even rockets.
Potato.
Can I please ask the first question?
Yes.
I'd like to ask Jeb a question.
Okay.
How does he manage to drink so many great bottles of wine and then get up the next day and then go for a really long bike ride through the mountains? Like, is this guy fucking Superman or what? Like, I look at it and I'm like, oh man, how does he find time?
The only way I can taste all those wines is because I get up and I go for the right bike ride. So
Jeb, just talk us through, what is your, like, you got to taste a lot. I get that, but how do you stay fit? To me, tasting is mentally exhausting. So how do you manage your time and stay healthy and fit and be a good taster?
He lives in Denver or Boulder, sorry.
So one thing is I'm very lucky to live in Boulder, but the reality is that it's a job, and you come up with a process that you can live with. And so I travel. I prefer to travel. Right now, I've done huge tastings at my office here. I'm tasting 2019 Bordeaux from Barreau, and my wife hates it. I have wine everywhere and boxes everywhere, and it's a total nightmare. But normally I travel. And so you show up and you have your game face on and you taste all day long and you go back to the hotel. And in the past, when I was younger, I could go out and I could do dinner and I could drink, and I don't do really any of that anymore. And you have a process that you do. There's no secrets. I mean, I taste wine just like you taste wine, just like Jordan and just like Bill. So you put it in your mouth, you have an impression, and you spit it out, and then you write a note on it. And so it is incredibly mentally fatiguing. But even when I travel, I book hotels with gyms. I mean, I do exercise. And so I do all of these things to try and keep a healthy lifestyle. So, you know, getting drunk every night, eating huge meals every night is not a good thing. And so at a certain point, you find a balance and a method that works for you. And so, anyway.
So if you're on the road, how many wines would you taste on a given day in your travel schedule?
I can taste a lot. It really depends on the region. It's normally an easy day is 100 wines.
Okay. And how many appointments would you see in a given day?
So that depends on each region. So for instance, if you're in Sonoma, it's 4. If you're in Bordeaux, it can be 14. If you're in the Rhone, it can be 8. And so it's all about how much time do I have? What is the drive time? And how do I arrange that?
And what happens if you get sick on the road, and you still got to taste and stuff like that? You got to have some bad days out there.
Yeah, you do your best to avoid that. I mean, before trips, you're safe. You try and be as healthy as you can. And if you have bad days, you either don't taste, you either cancel appointments and reschedule, or the reality is you can take, you do your best to taste and you do a good job. I would never write a note on a wine I didn't think that I was doing a good job on.
And do you still enjoy it now as much as you did when we first met many, many years ago?
You did in Broomfield. You visited me. I remember that, and I appreciate it.
You were Rhone Report. You were doing it part-time. You were still working, and we came out and hung out for the day, and we had a lot of fun.
That was great. I do. The reality is, anytime you do a job full-time, it's a job, and there are challenges to it. But I get just as excited today about opening a Côte de Rhône for dinner as I did 20 years ago. And so unquestionably, I love the job. And I think wine is such an incredible beverage. I mean, it brings so much joy, especially today, as we're talking about this wine called Gratitude, where we've all been caged up. I hope, and sales reflect this, that wine is given so much joy. And there's not another beverage, I think, that can transport you to a place. I mean, the beauty of a bottle of wine is when I open a bottle of wine from the Chateauneuf or from Paso, I can immediately say, this was made by Jordan from Paso, and you can be transported to these beautiful places. And so there's not another beverage that can do that. And so that's one of the reasons, many of the reasons that I love wine, and I continue to do what I do.
Love it.
Good. Thank you.
For those of you who don't know, Jeb has a tasting tomorrow with Michel Chapoutier at 2 p.m. Pacific time.
Don't get me going to these time zones. I'm 5 p.m.
It's
Eastern.
5 p.m. Eastern time. I'm not sure Mountain time.
And,
At a later time, that'd be like 4:12 in the morning or something crazy.
They had 12 minutes and 16 hours. Oh, and I was just so we did a little bit of a giveaway on Instagram and social media for winners of Bottle of Gratitude. Facebook, sorry, it's a Facebook winners. Katrina Veray Goldberg on Instagram. Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Okay, I can't read it. The Facebook winner was Katrina. Instagram was Megan Levitt. So congratulations, you got a Bottle of Gratitude.
I'll forge Michael Twelftree's name on the label.
We'll write Jeb's score on the side too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm here to answer your questions. I don't want to keep Jeb any longer because he's on a different time zone.
I have to take my dog for a walk with my wife. So.
Tell Tracy hi.
Yes.
Well,
say hello.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here and to taste your wines, Jordan. Thank you so much. And to talk with you as well, Michael. It's been too long. So thank you both very much. And be well. Thank you.
I'll see you tomorrow on your webinar. Good luck.
Yeah, good luck tomorrow.
Text me if you have any questions.
Will do. I got you
I
covered.
I don't know, actually. I have to text Becky from Epoch.
Okay, thank you.
Love you, buddy.
Awesome. Okay. Michael's got all day. So actually, Michael will stay. No, just kidding.
Today's a funny day. I've got to go. My oldest grower in McLaren Vale, Jimmy, his contract's up for renewal. So we're meeting at about an hour and a half. So
Ooh.
I've got another half an hour. So
Okay,
let's go through the questions.
Are you in the fog? Is that fog in your back at your window?
Yeah, it's winter here, mate.
Oh, that's right, it is, isn't it? It's
We've already done our harvest in 20, mate. Grapes are already in the barrel.
You're killing now. Yeah.
So I'm going to look through some of these questions and see. There's some just such great Grenache is what Pinot Noir promises. I love that. We talked about clones a little bit. I mean, clones are kind of hard. All I have experienced, I don't know. Michael did explain that he doesn't have that much clonal diversity. He's got more of the old vine thing, which is so cool. I mean, no one can question just the sexiness and the attraction we have to old vines, whatever the variety, whatever the clone. We have clones we tried because we have newer vines, and for us, the Spanish Garnacha clones have not worked as well as the sort of the French clones, the sort of fancy French clones we can get right now, and the traditional ones that were in California for a really long time. To say that the ones that were in California were Spanish or not, I don't know, but what we classify as Garnacha clones, which is Grenache, they just haven't worked as well for us. But it's just a little blip. Like, it doesn't really mean anything in the grand scheme.
I got to say, I think we get caught up on that whole clonal thing way too much. Like, I really think at the end of the day, yes, there's a variance, and I don't think you want to have too much of one clone, but to say that one is the overriding best clone out of everything, I think that's really naive, because you've got to look at every vineyard over a 10-year period and what you get over a 10-year and 10 different vintages. And if you start isolating it down to only having a select few clones, I think that's getting a little bit simplistic as well. So I think people nerd out on clonal, but really site will always be the winner. You know, if you put an average clone on a great site, you mostly make pretty terrific wine. Here we have a very generic clone of Shiraz called 1654, and 4 of my single vineyard wines are planted to 1654. Now, when I planted my own vineyard, I didn't plant any 1654, but it works really, really well for me in a number of sites. So it's just, yeah, I think we geek out on that a little bit too much. Most probably for you guys is the rootstock's more important sometimes for what's going on the ground than what clone you're putting on top of the rootstock, I would have thought.
So out there, Michael, you don't have any phylloxera at all. That's why you're all on rootstock, right?
Yeah, we've had phylloxera in Victoria. It was there 100 years ago. It started again in the Yarra Valley. It's eating a lot of vineyards over there at the moment, which is really, really sad. A lot of guys have got to rip out and replant on rootstock. But for the best part in South Australia, all of our vineyards are pretty much own rooted. So yeah, and then I planted a lot of vineyards on rootstocks and on own roots, and the consistency of vine to vine to vine, I have no misses in my own roots vineyards. My rootstocks I find incredibly frustrating.
Really?
The unions buck after a couple of years, and you know, you got to replant a vine, and it's never. So to me, I find rootstocks really, really frustrating. But for you guys, it's the only way to go.
So what would a 150-year-old Mourvedre, what would the trunk look like? Is it about that big? I mean, is it just? Well,
yeah, you know, they are, you know, there's some amazing pictures of all the old vineyards in the Barossa Valley, and yeah, they are. I had a vineyard once from a grower, and he had like a 120-year-old Grenache vine, and in one row, the vine was so big, every time I walked down there, it scared me. It was like something. I never forget, I'm like walking through this vineyard, I'm like, oh my God. But you know, once again, I'm a little bit with Jeb on this one. I've made most of my best wines off of young vineyards. You know, site selection, the way you prepare the soil, deep ripping, putting organic matter down, rye orientation, post, VSP. There's a million things you can do when you build a vineyard. And if you do all those things correctly, you're going to have a great asset. And I'd prefer to give the kids a great 20-year-old vineyard than a dung 100-year-old vineyard.
Right. Yeah, I think that's overrated as well. So
one of the questions that's kind of been asked a couple times, Bill answered Grenache and chocolate. In terms of food pairings with Grenache in general, I mean, it's a good question.
What would you pair with your Grenache? I mean, you're more of a foodie than me.
I am totally a foodie. Yeah, I find that Grenache kind of is kind of like a chameleon in a way, but I go up to like chicken and salmon, but I wouldn't go further than that normally, depending on the weight of it. But I could see it.
So no red meat.
No red meat.
No
I
lamb or
mean,
red beef.
you could, but like you have so many wines that are so great with
Right.
those that I think the Grenache would kind of like the beauty of it would get lost in the mix.
What about pizzas at Jordan's house? I would have
Yeah,
thought.
I was gonna say,
I was
so
going to say pizza.
so I have this thing in my head, and I've done it before, and I haven't done it consecutively because I try to drink a lot of different wines at home. But Grenache, kind of in that sort of Sangiovese thing where you can't like mix tomato with any variety easily if it's not white. But I feel like Grenache kind of can do what Sangiovese can do. So pizza, pasta is really great too. And obviously cheeses, like you can match, that's what the French are great about. Talk to the French about matching the cheese with the wine, because there is a cheese that matches, that they make where they grow their own, that can go better than anything in the world. But I mean, yeah, chicken, poultry, so duck would work really well too. But yeah, I kind of would like go to that limit because yeah, you have to save your big meats because we're always saying Syrah with lamb or red meat. We're saying Cabernet. We're saying,
Right.
you know, maybe Mourvèdre sometimes too if it's heavy. So like give those wines something that they can go with because Grenache can go with a lot of things. But yeah, chocolate I haven't tried. I feel like the acid might actually help a lot. with the
Chocolate
palate.
is just, well,
Yeah.
So for me, like if I go to a restaurant, all I want is the wine list. I don't give a hoot about the menu. All I care about is what I'm going to drink. So to me, kind of the
I mean,
food.
Michael, I feel the same way as you. I spend way much more on my wine at dinner than on the food. So pick your wine first, and then pick your food.
But, you know, to me, I don't think Grenache needs food, to be honest. You know,
I don't think it does either.
So old vines is such a generic term. What do you consider an old vine? And do you think it would be a good idea